Ready to go. So the purpose of this session is that we want to discuss sort of the intricacies of the elective process. And before we get into that, I just want to back up a little bit and talk about how you get there and the process in general. So you go through your coursework in year one, and then you'll go to the candidacy phase, in which you'll submit your candidacy paper for review. And then we talked about that yesterday, so I won't get into too detailed about what happens there. But once you pass candidacy, then you get to the elective phase in year three. And that phase starts with 7140, which is with Dr. Salyards. And that is where you will design your electives for the next 5 terms. And so during that, you'll talk about conceptual framework and things of that nature. And I'm going to let Will share that a little bit. But so that's the part and the purpose of the electives process is really to let you work on as much of the research proposal as possible. If you do it right, and ideally if everything goes smoothly, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. But if you handle it correctly, and there are no hiccups, then most of your research proposal will be done when you exit the elective phase and transition into the research proposal phase. So what I would like to do, Will, if it's okay with you, I will give you the floor, let you share a little bit about 7140 and just whatever thoughts you have in general. Alicia and I can chime in as necessary and chat a little bit along the way, and then we will open it up for questions and answers once we get done with that discussion. So Will, please, by all means, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Oh, Tracy's already clapping and I haven't done anything. Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that very much. Well, it's great to see all of you.
You've done so much already.
Boy, I set that one up, didn't I? Thank you.
Very well.
I have to acknowledge, and I want to acknowledge, the contribution to my own growth that Alicia has made. I get to work in businesses as an executive coach, so it gives me some inside glimpse of how some things work, and I've had some experiences there too. I basically watched her build this program from scratch, and in my understanding, that is one enormous task. She pulled it off, and she pulled it off well, believe me. And here we are now, a few years later, well, several years later, several graduates already out into the world. The program has good reviews, and now we have a successor coming on who is himself a product of the program. Boy, any way I slice this, Alicia, it seems to me like that you have done well.
Thank
and
you.
I wanted to say that, and thank you for your efforts.
Group hug.
It's just a treat to get to be here and meet you and talk with you. Some of you I've already had conversation with and have known you. Some of you have been in some classes together with me, and I think some are presently in some of the electives that I get to work in. What I would like to do is share my screen with you and run through a PowerPoint. But before I do that, I better check with the boss and ask, how much time do you want me to take for my piece of this?
You just take as much time as you need, Will. We'll be okay. So just go with it. Go with what you feel, my friend.
You know, telling a retired pastor that can really be dangerous. So, okay, let's see if John can work his magic and we can get this thing running here. Maybe I need to work some magic.
It is me who needs to work magic. So give me a second because I've never done this before. So just a second. Let me see if I can figure it out.
Are you seeing this presentation?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, bravo.
Yes.
If you came to the retreat last year, I haven't changed the figures. I just think they're so cute. I love them. So I stick with them. I like these little guys. So you've reached the elective phase, and what does that mean? What do you get to do now that you are in the elective phase? Chris gave such a beautiful overview of how you began the program, moved through candidacy, and then you enter the elective phase. And he also mentioned the idea of transitioning from student to scholar. And that's exactly what happens. It's going to comprise a good piece of what we're going to be talking about in my visit with you today is, if it were about doing coursework, look, you've got that down. You know how to do coursework. You've been to enough classes, enough schooling by this point that you've got it figured out. But this isn't about doing coursework. It is really all about the transition from a student. That's what students do, coursework. Scholars do research. And you're going to be transitioning from the student who does coursework to a scholar who does research. And let's see, how do I change? I used to be able to change this. That's how I changed. Good. Okay, here we go. Well, we're not going to be able to introduce ourselves in these small groups. And I've debated on the idea of having us issue a single sentence of 20 words or less and say your research interest. But I wonder if that would work for us. If you would just unmute your mic and take a shot at it. Your research interest in 20 words or less. Can you try it? Going once, going twice. Okay, we'll move on. Now, it's curious why no one took us up on that. There's all kinds of reasons. And it might have had something to do with getting succinct enough that you could encapsulate all that you want to do and the meaning of it in 20 words or less. It was a little exercise that points us in the direction that the electives will be taking us. And it is to be able to express your thoughts with a maximum of content using a minimum of words. It's a challenge. It's a lot of work to do it, but it's a journey that just pays dividends the rest of your life because you learn to think in the process. Oh, well, hey, we got to the end already. Hope you enjoyed all this. And you can see I've pushed some wrong buttons here. Here we go. I like to say in the electives that you just come as you are. The Methodist Church here in front of us, they have one meaning for it. I have another. That when you show up at the doorstep of the electives, pretty much like you showed up at the doorstep of the program 2 or 3 years previous. There's hopes and dreams and aspirations and desires. And here you have some idea of what it is you're going to be working on. It's becoming a little more firm for you, a little more concretized, and you're anxious to start getting into it. And the elective phase isn't a coursework. It's about you learning to do the research in the thing that you want to study. Isn't that enough? Well, as the little black sign at the bottom says, no, it won't be enough. That we're going to work together and come up with what is enough. And by that, I mean that becoming PhD, and that's the way I like to say it, that we don't get a PhD, you literally become PhD. I think of this as embodied learning, where the elective phase begins a journey for you and for me, where your learning in this is from the inside out, as it were. You're learning about yourself. You're learning about your assumptions. You're learning about your biases. You're learning about what you don't know. I like the way Theo Dawson says it, that it's not just thinking about a solution, but living the solution. And for me, that is such a key understanding, that you're moving away from this very highly structured idea of a student who's been given a project, go do the work, read the book, write the paper, come back. And now you become part of the solution. You start this 4-step journey of the research process where you identify your area of curiosity. And then you think about what your theory of the problem is, and then how your theory integrates with the greater theories and the research theories, and then the domain theories, and then the theories within the very methods of how you will proceed in structuring your research. Then you move into defining your literature base, figuring out where the information is that you need to study and to read. And from that comes your research questions, and you will cycle through that constantly. Then you're embraced with this idea of, I have to develop a conceptual frame. And what is a conceptual frame? Well, the books will tell you what a conceptual frame is. And so you'll start putting together a conceptual frame, but very quickly realize that you're being asked to think about the end result of something that you've never done before. And the gaps in your own mind start to become very clear, and even sometimes almost overwhelming. How do I get from here to there? Then you'll see that the conceptual frame, along with the learning, the research process, actually morph, because you are actually morphing. You're becoming something. Your thinking is becoming more crisp. The way that you process information becomes different. How you hold meaning starts to shift and change. Even how you view yourself begins to change. Does anybody still want to do this work? It's an amazing journey, but such a brilliant one, filled with light, as you start to stand into and become understanding of this topic that has held you so tightly and that you now must explore. So I call it embodied learning. It's this transition from students to scholars, where one of the big things that you encounter, and you embrace it first at your candidacy, is the notion of subjectivity. Chris talked about it yesterday when he said you'll get a paper from a committee and one person will say, work on this, and another person on the committee has no comments whatsoever. It didn't bother them, but it bothered the other one. But you can't advance until you satisfy everybody. That's called subjectivity. It means that doing the work isn't enough. You have to satisfy the people who approve your work. And that almost stinks. It just seems so unfair. But it's how it works. It's the nature of the PhD. This degree is so heavily rooted in antiquity. When students were humble and they approached knowledge nearly as an altar. Look, I'm not asking us to do that. That's not where I'm going with this. But I'm saying that some of those remnants continue with us today. In our transition from student to scholar, you will encounter subjectivity, and you will also encounter the idea of an intention of excellence. You never write to the minimum. If it's a 300-word paper, you don't do 298 and thank God you made 298. You never write to the minimum. It's always excellent. It's excellence because it's about you now, because you are the product. It is you that is becoming something. And you want you to do well, to be well. The attitude of a servant, these next two pieces, Mike Young. Mike worked with us in the program. He's a philosopher by training, a PhD, and just a wonderful, wonderful person. I love Mike dearly and deeply. Mike described this journey as an attitude of a servant. It's the humility of learning and becoming. It really is a place where, and we encounter this in the electives, where our scholars, our learning to be scholars, come with firm beliefs, firm intentions, and having many, many courses and hours of schooling already under their belt, and very well content that they are very knowledgeable about something, only to discover that this work is pushing them in a different direction where their knowledge is being called into question. It happens. It doesn't mean you don't know it. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that you're in a new box. You're in a new sandbox. And this is about you becoming something. So the humility of learning and becoming. Can you push back? Absolutely. Can we have a discussion? I want a discussion. Absolutely. We can talk, we can visit. You can disagree. Absolutely. I'm wrong sometimes too. That's all well and good. We want you to step into this and lean into it. The second statement that Mike made is around the idea of clarity and communication. And when he said these words to me, they just locked into my soul, as it were. The rigor of thought expressed through the rigor of mechanics. APA. You heard already, I think again, it was Chris yesterday who talked about APA. And it is a big deal. Really, it's a big stinking deal. APA is non-negotiable. You have the manual, and believe me, really believe me when I say this, you will read the manual almost like you read your Bible. I'm serious about that. You have to get it deep within you so that you know APA. Every university has a language that scholars must approach the university using this language. With Johnson University, it is the language of APA. It's the academic tone that we use. So you are expected to know it and to use it. In the elective phase, you will see high attention given to APA, to even the smallest points that would probably frustrate you. What's the big deal about indenting, not indenting, about a running head or using headers or headings? The big deal about a page number, about just, and it just goes on and on and on. It's all a big deal because it's the language. Also in our transition from students to scholars, there's this emphasis on style, content, and mechanics. I just breezed across those, but they are very important. A tone, you maintain an academic tone. You'll see comments, keep it academic. Try saying it this way so that it's not conversational. Some of us have been taught to this point that the best writing is the way you speak. It is not in a PhD program. There's an academic tone to which you must strive and reach so that you're speaking. It's not a disemboweled, disembodied third person language. That's old style. No, we don't do that here. It's first person, but it's first person without the pronouns. It's first person where you are always present but never visible, so that you're writing in such a way that no one has a doubt who's saying it, but you don't have the need of saying I and me all the time. Developing a voice. Voice is just very simply that you've internalized the author's thoughts. And now you're speaking their thoughts using your words. Simple to say, it takes some work to get there, but you can do it. You read deeply, you read widely, you read broadly, and you hold those thoughts, and then you speak them using your words, and that's voice. Device is anything that gets in the way of your voice. Maintaining an academic style, and this is a very broad category, and you'll come across it in your papers. You'll see device, and you say, well, what's that about? It got in the way of you speaking using your voice. One of the more famous devices is someone to say, for example, and then they give an example. Never do that. From this point forward, forget you even know how to do it. Stop doing it. Devices, example gets you in trouble. You read it in scholarly papers. Folks, when you get a PhD, you can do what you want. But first, you have to learn the rudiments of becoming PhD. The reason I discourage example is when you use an example, you shortcut the argument. You created a conceptual device whereby your reader can conceptually understand your meaning without you having to make the argument. To do the hard work of writing and reasoning and explaining why, and then building the picture for your reader. So you don't use an example. A reporting is using another person's words to make your point. You'll often hear the expression according to. Again, you read that in scholarly papers. You don't get to do it here. You have to make the argument. It has to be your voice, your critical thinking that's in play here. Content. Evidence of deep and broad reading. It's comprehensive. What are you saying? Where is it coming from, the source that it's originating? Also, in our transition is, again, style, content, and mechanics. We want to hear you be able to conceptualize thought, to think critically, express it well, demonstrate understanding, that you've read these authors and they're coming from different sources, different points of view, and you have been able to conceptualize what they're saying. Then bring your argument into the arena, and with what they've said in your argument, make a statement that displays what you want to talk about. Don't just talk about what they're talking about. That's a book report. We want you to learn to talk about what you want to talk about. This 50-cent word synthesization, I use it because for me it means the ability to synthesize thought into coherent but succinct sentences. Sentences that last a paragraph have got a problem. It has not been conceptualized well. The next is integration, where you can take these disparate thoughts and bring them, weave them into a narrative whole. I mentioned yesterday the idea of interiority, where sometimes a person will argue the point in their head. And I've done this, where I've come up with what I think I've got it figured out in my head. And when I write, I just write what I figured out. But I don't write how I got there. And in this work, we have to see how you got there. We have to watch you argue. We have to hear you and what you think, because it's all part and process of your becoming a scholar. Some of the unique features of the PhD, or would this be a good time to stop and just ask for some questions? I stopped. No questions?
This is David. I have a
Yeah.
question regarding the voice and the according to, or so and so asserted, that kind of thing. That still probably is maintained through like a lit review portion, right? Are you talking about during maybe discussion portions of your writing that you would not anymore use that, or is that true for the whole document?
That's true beginning day one of the electives. Yeah. Break the habit, get out of it. We are taught as students to never make an assertion. It's just so hardly frowned upon. And we're taught never to plagiarize. So there's an abundance of safety by saying according to, or so-and-so said. And look, you're going to have quotation and you're going to say so-and-so said. That happens. It's part of what we do. It's how often do you do it? In the PhD, you reach a point, and the electives is that point, where you are credited with being an informed opinion. You're not an authority. You can't make assertion, but you are an informed opinion. You have stood among the scholars. You've heard them. You've listened to them. You have something to say. Now say it. Write their thoughts using your words and then cite them for it. But use your words. You'll learn that as you are developing that ability, that voice, and you're bringing up your words to express their thoughts, that it becomes easier for you to bring in your own arguments as well. And it's a subtle transition, but it's a needed transition that helps you make this move, this shift from student to scholar. David, does that help? Does that answer the question? Okay. Anybody else?
Dr. Salyards, how important is it to maintain the active voice versus passive within the writing style? Is that important, or is it, can that be overlooked sometimes, or is that something that is looked for within?
Yeah, I think it's going to vary by your committee. In the way I write, there's some statements that just seem better written passively. But I'm going to put on my official hat, and now I'll tell you, you have to write actively. Did I just give you a hole you could drive through?
Typically, that's my approach, trying to stay in the active voice. But there are times where it seems not redundant, but difficult to shift over sometimes to, it seems better to write in the passive for explanation sake. So I was just wondering how strict that's held within the lit review and even within the proposal itself.
Chris, would you talk to that as well?
Sure. Yeah, I think Dr. Salyards did mention the best approach is to do your best, and then when passive, when necessary, use passive voice. I would say, and it does vary. I think he's also right that it varies by committee. Each committee member has a different perspective, has a different, even has a different pet peeve, for example.
Yeah.
I remember Mike Young, who Will quoted earlier. One of his pet peeves is using the word impactful. And if you use the word impactful in any paper or proposal or dissertation, he will flog you, and he'll do it publicly. And so, each person has a different perspective. Having said that, I would say, generally speaking, your committee is more concerned about clear, concise, structured writing, as opposed to whether or not you use correct voice here and there. I think that's the most important thing. Is that do you communicate it well? Is it easily understood? Is it not contrived? Is it simple? Is it technical in nature? And is the use of sources, and as Will mentioned, the idea of writing in your own words and then citing, is that there? So I would say, yes, be mindful, but I don't recall a situation, honestly, in a committee where we said, you need to go back and rewrite this because it's too passive. Does that make sense?
I'll give a little different viewpoint. I put in the chat an APA reference just to sort of give you sort of the rules, which really either is permissible. But we do err on the side of active voice, and the Heartful editor will edit your final manuscript for active voice, unless it makes sense. I mean, there is, as Will noted, there's times when it just sounds better and more clear. And so I think that APA gives you the latitude to do either, but our editor, Heartful editor, has a bias towards active voice.
Anybody else?
Dr. Salyards, you mentioned making assertions and coming from where we're used to quoting and citing from other people's words. I wrote down something that you said. You put, write their words as your words and cite them for it. Is that key to making your own assertions in this type of work? Because that's something I've had trouble with in my writing, is just feeling confident enough in my own assertions without, you know. So could you speak on that a little bit more?
I will attempt to. There is a way that you can make a direct assertion into a paper. It's called ambivalence. Ambivalence, you'll see it very often when the student has argued using the well-voiced, everything is just singing right along. And at the end of their argument, you'll see it. It may be, or it could be, it is possible, will be the opening remark. And then you'll read what they just said. And what you just read is that student's opinion about all the stuff they've been talking about. They inserted their opinion into the document. You can only do it, I wouldn't tell you to do it frequently. You can do it, and you have to use ambivalence when you do it so that it's conditional. When you make an assertion, you're asserting a fact. When you make that kind of an assertion, then you have to have a citation behind it. Does that help with the answer?
Yes, I was just, I was thinking about how it just seems like by the choices of things that we put in there and the order and things like that, that's pretty much how we, you know, outline the study and things. Our voice and stuff comes through, our thoughts come through as we go through that. And I was just wanting some clarification, make sure I was on the right track.
Well, I also invite Chris and Alicia also to talk to that if they would like to.
Yeah, I think the example there, if there was to be an example, you could say that most people like vanilla ice cream, cited Smith 2005. Most people like nuts in their ice cream, and I'm just making this up as I go, Wilson 2012. Therefore, it could be possible that most people would like butter pecan ice cream or whatever, you know, because you're drawing an inference from those things that you've cited. So it's important to base it on that literature,
Exactly.
but you can draw those conclusions. And I think the other thing I would add to it is most students probably use too many quotes. I think that's probably a pretty general rule. That I think as Will mentioned, it's sort of a crutch at times that we want to just throw that in there. And so I think quotations need to be used sparingly and when they are really needed and when that emphasis is really necessary. So that's another little addendum I would make to that discussion as well.
I just see Tracy's note that butter pecan is her favorite, so it could potentially be researcher bias. Okay, anybody else, or would you like to continue?
Dr. Salyards,
Yes.
when it comes to developing your own argument by using the words of others, how important is it to distinguish between others' ideas and your own within a given sentence?
I've never seen it that cut and dried. I see it more as I've been influenced by their ideas. And here's how my thoughts mesh with what they've said. I'm not sure I answered your question, but does that give you some idea?
I think that helps. Is it safe to assume that whenever we make our own assertion or argument, that needs to be kept distinct from the ideas of others in our citations?
No, there's not a block of somebody, then there's a block down here where you're talking. It's all woven together.
Okay.
You're building, you're expressing yourself while you're talking about what they're saying as well.
It does need to be clear that you are basing your assertion, though, on the work of someone else. So that's the one thing that I would say is that as you're disseminating your own information, your own concepts, your own ideas, it still needs to be based on an assertion that's already been made in the literature. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's helpful. So the citation that comes at the end of a sentence is not an indication that everything in that sentence is from that source necessarily.
I would say that, again, using my example before, you could have one sentence that say a wide majority of people like vanilla ice cream, then you cite that assertion, Smith, then you have comma, therefore it could be possible that others would like that. Now, so you would have very clearly which assertion is cited, who you're building upon, and then the other part is clearly something that you're building upon that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have a question, Dr. Salyard. I am one of those that also struggles with academic tone. And one of the struggles I have with is, when I'm presenting my argument, I can say this paper argues ABC, but I can only use that so many times. I mean, I can use that on page 1, but when I come to page 20, I cannot say this paper argues, and I cannot say I argue. So, which other phrases can I use, to present my argument? And then again, I cannot say according to. So I feel like I'm lost of words when it comes to trying to present my argument.
Certainly. That's so well said, Jerry. Thank you. I appreciate you bringing that to us today. What I encourage folks to do is don't look for the phrases, make the argument. So to use the example of the majority of people like vanilla ice, the majority of people like butter pecan ice cream. You might start by saying, it has been demonstrated that the majority of the population within the United States enjoys butter pecan ice cream. And you quote, cite Smith. That is a launching point for you. It's not a phrase, it's a launching point for you. Because I'll just back up a bit. When you open a paragraph, I encourage folks never open a paragraph with a quotation. Open it with your own statement. Anchor that paragraph in a strong statement. It's somebody else's words, that's fine. You cite them for it, but you've made a statement, you've set the tone. I think that what you will discover is that if you will set the tone in the opening sentence, the rest of it becomes much easier for you. Now you've got something to base from, to work on. Does my answer make sense? Whether or not it helps is another question. Does it make sense to you? Okay. Is that something that would be helpful for you to do?
Yes.
Okay. Are there more? Then I'll return to the screen and we'll wrap this up shortly. I like to talk about the unique features of the PhD. It has meaning to me, and I hope maybe that it will also have meaning to you. One of the things that has always stood out to me about the PhD is that the university cannot make you PhD. They can confer the degree upon you, and that will happen at your graduation. But it is your committee who makes you PhD. When you have successfully defended your work and the committee has agreed that you have merited place in the body of scholars, they will call you doctor. And from that point, you are a doctor. Whether you graduate or not is immaterial to the fact. You should graduate. It's a real buzz to do it. But it is the committee who grants you the degree. That's a unique feature of a PhD. It's research-based. It's not just an academic inquiry into a textbook. You literally have to learn how to do research. And Wilbur Reed talked about that a couple days ago. We have to. You have to demonstrate that you can do research. And that's really what your dissertation is about. Demonstrating that you can do the work of research. You will encounter 3 seminal documents in your journey to PhD. Seminal because they have consequence. Johnson does not turn students away from scholarly pursuit lightly. So you don't need to hear this and start quaking in your boots, but you do need to be aware that seminal documents in a PhD have consequence, meaning that you can not be allowed to advance. If your candidacy is not sufficient, you will not be allowed to advance. If your proposal is not sufficient, you will not be allowed to do research until it is. If your dissertation is not sufficient, you will not be allowed to become PhD until it is. So they're called seminal documents. And each of these seminal documents is laden with subjectivity. Other people determine when it's good enough. You don't get to determine that. As hard as you've worked on it, you don't get to determine it. Somebody else determines when it's good enough. It's another one of those things about being humble. Another, I think, feature of the PhD is language. It's voiced differently. It reads differently. Learning academic language and the skill of academic writing is a big piece of the electives. It begins at 7130, which is not an elective class, but it also, that's the candidacy class, and it moves into 7140, which is an elective class. I like to talk about the inclusion into the body of scholars. And we apply for inclusion, and that's literally what you're doing in this journey. When you move through the electives and becoming more well-versed in the notions of research and the language of research and the skill of academic writing, and then you create these seminal documents, and each one of those is an application for inclusion into the body of scholars. You are putting forth work to demonstrate why you should be included and known thereafter as a scholar. The PhD is also recommended by your committee upon merit. And again, I don't mean to just belabor the point, but again, it is the committee who determines what is meritorious. They get to say that you have finally earned the right to be in the body of scholars. 7140 begins the elective period. It's the first of 6. And there's the numbers of them. No need to remember any of that stuff. You'll bump into it. Well, what they are is the first one, 7140, is determined by the university. There's a course of study. There's books that you buy and read, and you submit papers based on those books. The following 5 are self-determined within guidelines. It means you get to create courses of study for the remaining 5 electives. Some students are able to transfer credits in at this point from other doctoral work. And if that is one of the things you're able to do, then there's a way to do that, and that'd be wonderful. Most, however, don't, and we work through the electives together. All the electives are overseen by your facilitator, which at this point is Dr. Beard and myself. The purpose of the electives is to create the content of your research proposal. Now, you just, much like your candidacy paper, you can write about nearly anything you want to in the electives, so long as it's connected to your project. I don't recommend it. Fact is, I will urge you very strongly to not take that approach. I think the best use of the electives is to, the first one, create the content of your proposal by writing your introduction, your lit review, your methodology, or to study, that's the second one, an area of your project where you need greater depth. Theory can be one of those areas. Or you just want to do a deeper dive into a particular subject, but use the electives to work toward your project. Earlier, it was mentioned that when you finish the electives, you could have a good portion of your research proposal completed. And that is the idea, as well as the ideal, that the work that you've done, each deliverable, can be further massaged and even rewritten so that they flow together to create the bulk of your research proposal, so that when you finish, you've got a good deal of that work already accomplished. It's a wonderful device if you're able to use it and capitalize on it. The electives, another purpose is also, this is a big one, to hone your skill as an academic writer. APA and content mechanics. Content and mechanics are the things that's just a big deal in the electives. Some of the guidelines, and this, if it looks like this is a repeat of the previous slide, you're seeing it correctly because it is. I encourage every student, and we'll work on it, it's always individual with every student, to use the electives to build your literature review. Maybe take 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 electives. I've had students take 4 electives to do literature review. And that's okay. It's where do you need the help? Where do you need to spend the time? So you use those electives to develop it, to write it. Use the electives to write your chapter on methodology. And then use the electives to write your chapter on the introduction. So you've essentially completed the research proposal. The deliverable at an elective, things do change in the electives. There's a written deliverable of 5,000 to 8,000 words. That's the target range. I don't want to see you go below 5, and don't go too much above 8. The reason is I want you to write concisely, think about it, use a maximum of thought, achieve that with a minimum of expression. Complete and participate and complete all the form assignments. Forms are different in the electives. We ask that you check in once a week. There's no need to reply to anybody else unless you want to. Forums have an assignment within them. It's a light assignment. That is, the only thing to do from it is to talk about it in the forum. But it's another learning tool that is part of the forums. And there's not a letter grade in the electives. You don't get A, B, C, Ds. You pass or you fail. Here the responsibility is on you. If you submit a deliverable that conforms to 5,000 to 8,000 words and is in line with what you selected, you will pass. If you don't submit a deliverable, you will fail. Failing is bad news in the electives. You don't want to do that. It's very hard to fail in the electives because if you do garbage work, you're the one who's going to have to bear the responsibility of it. It will be you, when it comes time to do your research proposal, who has to hear your committee say, mm-mm. So it's better to just do it right in the electives. And some of the other guidelines, for me, I think these are important, and so I include them here. I call it creating a culture of confidence and care. That the posture of the faculty toward you is one of humility. We are going to be rigorous in your papers. Just as easily say we missed it. That's not a problem. The object is that we learn together. Nobody in this program thinks we're Mount Olympus and Zeus fires lightning bolts from us. We are learners together. And I found that if we can each approach it from that way, giving the other the benefit of the doubt, that it does make things a little easier. That we have a shared mission. And to me, it's a big deal that we succeed as you succeed. We want you to graduate. We're not here to say, how can we keep you out of this? We're here to say, how can we make you better at it? We will be honest in our assessment and our delivery. We have to be, because there's rigor. This degree has to mean something. That we want to be the people behind you, pushing you over the finishing line. Our hope is that those things will make this a safe place for the keeping of one's soul. Because I think the faculty here literally hold the thought that we are entrusted to some degree with your very transformation from one way of being to another way of being holds great meaning. And so we take that, I think, very seriously. So with that, are there any further questions that you might like to raise or ask, or even comments?
I would just add, on a practical level, it is during your electives that you will choose your committee and go through that process in preparation of the next phase. I will also say that one of the things that I found as an elective facilitator, that's when you have several students and that process is spread over the 5 electives, which is 5 7-week sessions, it's often difficult for me to see the entire picture of the project as a whole. So one thing to keep in mind is that it's important to communicate with your facilitator. I know Will and I both set up times for phone calls and Zoom meetings and things of that nature. I've really discovered that a lot of the breakthroughs can happen in those personal conversations. But it is important to remember that we are reviewing it in spurts and not the big picture, that you will be responsible then for putting it together into a cohesive unit in conjunction with your chair when it's time for research proposal. So the other thing I would say too is that it is okay if things shift a little bit during that process.
Yes.
We've had students that will come in and say, I want to change this, I want to move that. I have one student in the current electives process in cohort 12 that decided they needed an extra elective to focus on the literature review. And of course, we want to take advantage of that opportunity for students. So that is okay. It's just a conversation with your facilitator. And there was one other thing that I was going to mention, and at the beginning of this process too is when you'll declare your concentration. So are you going to serve? Is your concentration going to be in educational leadership, organizational leadership, so on and so forth? And that's when you'll make that distinction as well.
Dr. Beard or Dr. Salyards, could you talk more about the process of choosing your dissertation committee and what recommendations do you have for going about that?
Chris, I'll defer to you on that.
Sure. So a couple of things that we're working on currently, and one of the things I'm working on as director is trying to expand our dissertation pool of committee members. We're trying to add some people to, I'm trying to put together a resource so you can see who is available, what their research interest is, what their degree is, things of that nature. There are some guidelines in requirements according to the program for who you choose. That includes you need to have at least one member of the committee that has a PhD in leadership. You need to have someone from the affiliate faculty on your committee. And you can have, it's a minimum of 3. You can have 4 committee members and you can have an outside reader. So in other words, if there's a scholar that you have engaged with, or if there's someone that you think will be a good addition to your committee, then you can have someone from outside Johnson University, outside of the PhD program, be a part of that. And then there's a process of that where we'll need an unofficial transcript of their terminal degree, and also there's an updated CV from them. But basically the way we've done it, and this is I think a good process, is you'll just kind of come up with your preferred committee. And what we'll do, we just went through this with cohort 12. I had the entire group send me their preferred committee along with a synopsis of their project, their research, and their methodology, because there's several things that we want to make sure that you have in your committee. We want people that are familiar with your methodology. So for example, in our program, if you're using quantitative research, you absolutely have to have either Dr. Wilbur Reed or Dr. Julie Wooltill on your committee, because they are our resident quantitative research experts. For example, I did phenomenology. So if you want phenomenology, I'm a guy you might want to have on your committee. We also want you to find committee members that align with what your topic is. So for example, adult learning theory, if that's your topic, that's something I have a forte in and understanding in. Spiritual formation as well. And so we kind of want to match that as well. The last thing is, well, there's 2 things, I guess. The other thing from my standpoint as a director is I want to make sure that we're spreading out the load, that we don't have any 1 or 2 faculty members that are serving on 1,000 committees. So I will give recommendations based on your preferred to say, okay, let's try to substitute this person for this person based either on those 2 things I mentioned as far as methodology or interest, research interest, but also their load, their workload is something, because I'll be frank with you, you do not want to have somebody on your committee that is overwhelmed with work, because you want somebody that's available as available as possible to help you move forward through that process. And then the last thing, to be quite honest and frank, is that you want to pick people that you can work with. You have people, you're going to be working with this person for probably around a year, give or take, maybe more, maybe less. Your chair and your committee members. There were people in my PhD process that there were teachers, professors that I really appreciated, but I really didn't feel like they'd be a great fit. I have great respect for all of them, but I didn't really feel like it was the best fit from a personality standpoint, my own experience, and that's okay. That is completely acceptable to say, you know what, Dr. Beard was kind of a jerk and he graded really hard, and I know that he's not going to be the guy that I want because he's going to make me do this a little more than what I want to do, and so I'll pick somebody else instead. And that's an acceptable reason to do that as well. Somebody that if you just, that rubbed you the wrong way, that happens. So fit, personality fit, and is an important thing as well. Does that answer your question, Lyle? Okay, good. Any other questions about the elective process?
Dr. Beer, can I ask a follow-up question about the committee?
Sure.
So can you just describe a few ways you mentioned working with our committee over, quite a bit and having good fit? What are can you just share a few examples of ways in which you'll be working with your committee?
Sure. I'll give you the quick rundown of what that looks like as far as the process is concerned. So the chairperson is the one that's going to be the one that's coaching you the most. They're the one that's going to be interacting with you the most. Once you get out of your elective phase, the first thing you'll do is contact your chairperson and give them an update about where you are on your proposal. You might say, I have my entire proposal done with my electives, but I need to put it together and edit it and add connecting material, transitional material, that sort of thing. I expect to have that to you within 2 weeks, for example. Then what you'll do is you'll submit it to them. They will review it personally as a chairperson and then send it back to you for revision. At that point, if it's in good shape, if you have a really good document, sometimes the chairperson will say, as soon as you've made these revisions, send it on to the committee as a whole. Sometimes they'll say, send it back to me so I can review it again. It really depends on the judgment of that chair until you get to go to the entire committee. Then the committee will do the same thing. They will review it and send it back to you for revision. It's important, I will tell you, just like with the candidacy process, to review your committee's feedback as a whole. I really highly recommend that you don't start revising unless you're talking about just APA or that kind of thing. Don't start revising substantially until you have feedback from all of your committee members. That way you're able to weigh it together and to look at it and to say, okay, as a whole, what's the direction I need to take here to change? So the committee will send it back to you. You'll revise it. You'll resubmit again. Then the committee will say, we need to review it again. You may have to go through that process another time or two. But when the committee then says, I'm ready this person is ready as far as I'm concerned to defend, then you'll be sent to the defense. The chairperson will contact John Strickland and he will set up that so there's a Zoom defense. Once you do that, IRB process kicks in, you go do your research, then you write chapters 4 and 5, and then the whole process starts over again. Go to your chair, comes back. However many times that takes, go to the committee, back and forth, then defense, and then you're the doctor. So that's quick, right?
Just like that.
Just like that.
Sounds so easy.
That was perfect. Thank you.
Good.
So when should the selection of the committee be completed by in the elective process? When should that start and when should that be finished by?
We usually introduce that in elective 4. And usually we hope to have that done during that elective. Other questions?
Dr. Beard, could you describe the proposal defense and the dissertation defense in more detail?
Sure, I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version of that in the way that we approach that. And I'll share it in distinction to other programs. Other programs will have you defend and they will either say, yep, good job, or they'll say, nope, this stinks, so go do it again. And you'll have to come back and maybe defend again. In our program, the way that Dr. Crumpton has designed it, and it's beautiful, I think, is that your back and forth with the committee of substance, it comes before the defense. So in our program, if a defense is scheduled and the committee is saying, you are going to pass this defense. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to just let you slide through. We have to make your life miserable for about an hour, hour and a half during that defense, because that's what PhDs do to make other PhDs. We will grill you. We will ask questions. We will, you'll give a presentation and then there'll be a Q&A time. And usually, sometimes there's that result of that discussion is we want to make you to make a stipulation or a change. Maybe there's something about the methodology that we think, why don't you go ahead and go back in and revise this? But it's never anything that takes more than a day, typically. It's not a significant, like you need to go rewrite chapter 2. It is, hey, why don't you add in there that you are going to do this or that, that kind of thing. So that defense, again, both for the research proposal and the doctoral defense, we see that as a time of celebration. We see that as a time of presenting your work and the culmination of what you've done over the years to be able to say, okay, here's what we think. And a lot of the discussion, frankly, is we are excited because you can now do this, this, and this, or this is what this research might help with, and really brainstorm about future publication and engagement as well. So the defense is not to be something you should fear. The defense is something that once you get to that point, you've succeeded. It's just a matter of going through that process and having that discussion. Does that make sense?
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Good. Anything else? Okay, well, again, thank you, Will, so much for presenting that. And I've seen that presentation a couple of times, and it's a beautiful picture of what becoming a PhD is all about. And I've seen no one articulate it better than Will. So thank you, Dr. Salyards, very much for your presentation there. We've got just a few minutes, quick short break before we get to another PhD alumni presenting. Dr. Kimberly Mendoza will be here in about 7 minutes. So thanks for being here. And I'll stick around a little bit here. If there's any other questions, then you can ask those. But otherwise, we'll see you at the next session. Thank you.